This is Naija Unfiltered on SYMFONI TV. My name is Olawale, Oluwade, and my guest today is Dr. Ayokunle Fagbemi, political scientist, national security and defense scholar, also fellow Academy of International Affairs, and I might also add a seasoned and reputable public affairs analyst. Dr. Fagbemi, you're welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
Nice to have you.
Thank you.
This is your debut on SYMFONI.
Yes.
You're welcome. Let's get on with our conversation, Doc. We don't have too much time. How would you evaluate President Tinubu's approach to upholding democratic tenets or ethos in Nigeria since his assumption of office?
It's on record that I have said, in summary, that the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu GCFR administration is more of a totalitarian tiptoeing autocratic system. Totalitarian tiptoeing autocratic system in the sense that this is a regime that deliberately, consciously, like the predecessor, President Muhammadu Buhari, both of them of the APC extraction, willingly, without effort, breach the legal and policy frameworks of the Nigerian state and deliberately throw data into the public domain, expecting Nigerians to discuss it, and then they now use the reactions of Nigerians to moderate whatsoever they are trying to do. I'll give you a good example. Today, we are now doing the harmonic vibrations around the concept of the probability of a state policing system coming to the limelight, and probably we'll see the breath and life in the next couple of weeks, hopefully, if they are not using this as part of their deceitful deception. When you're talking about the attempt to reorganize the police and to bring about the state police, for example, to clearly showcase that they are totalitarian, tiptoeing, and autocratic, you will discover that the 1999 Constitution that the President swore to protect and uphold says there shall be a Nigerian Police Council. Membership includes the state governors. But unfortunately, like it happened under Buhari administration, all policing conversations are done outside of the Nigerian Police Council, and very deliberately. And that's why I said they do this intentionally. The conversations and submissions by governors on whether state police should be or not was outsourced to the National Economic Council, where the governors are equally members. But the Economic Council is not the correct constitutional forum at which that conversation ought to take place. It is not. Ordinarily, when we summarize that we are dealing with a totalitarian, tiptoeing, autocratic system, many will say, are we not being too harsh? But when you take a look at the fact that one of the major issues that you want to deal with is resolving the intractable security challenges of the Nigerian state, you would have expected that the conversations around law enforcement, public order, should have taken place within the ambits of the constitutionally provided for platforms. I'll give you another example. The Constitution, Section 153, talks about the existence of two major councils that have to play some other roles: the National Security Council and the National Defense Council. The same thing happened under Buhari. You suddenly hear from the Presidential Information Management System that the president met with service chiefs. By the 1999 Constitution, there's nothing like that known to law. And in terms of the national security and defense management architecture, there's nothing like that known to law. You can only meet in National Security Council or in the National Defense Council where security chiefs and heads of intelligence and military establishments are participating. And when you take a look at those footages that they have always presented to us, each of those meetings have been inchoate. Inchoate in the sense that the Constitution provides that the Minister of Interior, the minister in charge of foreign relations, foreign affairs, ought to be members of the Security Council. I will want to be corrected by being shown at any point in time where the Minister of Interior in particular had participated in some of those meetings. And you will recall, at one particular time, the presidency issued a statement after they finished one meeting, which I've rightly tagged in public domain to be a strategy meeting, where you had the now minister in charge of solid minerals, Sunday Dari, and a few others in attendance. And they said they were going to retrieve from VIPs police protection, and then they wanted the Civil Defense Corps to take hold of that responsibility. That decision was taken at a forum where the Minister of Interior, who is the supervising minister in charge of the Nigerian Civil Defense Corps, Security and Civil Defense Corps, was not present. So it could not, it was only receiving data and information to process from third party. So when you put all this in perspective, this administration has successfully muddled through in such a way that they have not necessarily performed optimally, with the exception of deliberately doing strategic distraction, strategic desensitization, particularly from the Presidential Information Management System. In terms of service delivery, you will want to talk about the economy. All of us are familiar with everything that we are experiencing, and we know that it is not yet.
Thank you, Doc, for your opening remarks. A logical follow-up question, because what I asked was, what's your assessment of the president either deepening or weakening democratic ethos or tenets? Specifically, Doc, the president is being accused by opposition figures and political parties of a deliberate, destabilization of, even suppression, of political parties. Political actors, opposition actors are being hounded, either in detention or put through the judicial system and all of those. Can you speak to this? The allegation against the president, the ruling party, the administration, of a deliberate effort to weaken, destabilize, hound opposition, both the parties and actors.
Now, descending to the realm of the politicking, you will discover, and this is why I stayed at the level of asking us to understand that there is a deliberate, conscious attempt not to obey the Constitution. When you look at the Constitution in terms of relating with other stakeholders of the Nigerian state and the democratic project, we are supposed to operate a participatory democracy. And the moment you get sworn in as President Commander-in-Chief, you are expected to transmute and transition to governance services delivery, for which you ought to allow the engagement, the strategic engagement, and the participation of other stakeholders. And one of the hallmark of participatory democracy is a robust debate where you can easily tap from the opposition their ideas. Unfortunately, it is correct to summarize and say it seems as if the opposition and the civic space is already emasculated, is being made to shrink, and people are now beginning to gravitate towards the idea of saying, we know who the prince in office is, and perquisites of existence and sustenance cometh from him, so we need to move in that direction. It is at that attempt that any government in power dictates the tune that you now have political actors moving in that direction. And it is because the incumbent administration has failed to allow for robust debates, and that is why you've been having people crossing over from one political party to the other. In the National Assembly, when they cross over from one political party to the other, you will discover that rather than activate the constitutional provisos that says they automatically should lose their seats, what happens is that they gloss over it because they have moved into the ruling party. And then you now have a situation where a senator, Abaribe, for example, was nearly made to lose his own seat, but they managed it because if they allowed it to happen the way they were going on that day on the floor of the Senate, it will boomerang and will cause katakata. So they have had to quieten and say, no, be guided, let us go. Now everything is on the wraps. If you have a system that is like that, and when you take a look at some of the litigations that have bedeviled the political parties, whereas it's very difficult to immediately say you can point to these particular characters and episodes that have led to this, you will appreciate that there is going to be some elements of truth in this fact that all these things have been happening. I'll give you a good example that we need to understand. Recently, on the Oríire matter, a certain Ayodele Fayose, former governor of Ekiti State, made an allegation by June 1, the day after the presidential delegation visited Oríire, the community where the crisis occurred, and made some allegations and tied it to political matter against Seyi Makinde, the incumbent governor of Oyo State. Interestingly, that certain Ayodele Fayose has now been rewarded with the chairmanship of the Rural Electrification Agency, which speaks volumes. And some of the things that he said on that occasion that made Seyi Makinde, the governor of Oyo State, to make reference to the fact that I needed a lot more investigation. When you want to look at it, the way they have been emasculating and then trying to strangulate the opposition is so bad. I'm not trying to hold brief for any of these characters. I normally try as much as possible to obey what my mother asked me to do before she died. She passed on in our hands here in Abuja, literally speaking, and she wanted me not to become partisan in politics, but I discuss it. When you look at the Oríire thing, what the governor Seyi Makinde probably will be saying, and I understand it from my own past antecedents of being involved in this system. The incumbent president of the country traveled for 13 days on a 3-country trip, beginning of May 3, and then he returned on May 15. On May 11, that's the timeline we need to understand. On May 11, a certain Major General Famadewa was appointed through a release from the office of the media advisory team and the secretary to government, that he was appointed Homeland Security Advisor on May 11. On May 14, a political event occurred in Ibadan. On May 15, the abduction occurred. That's the timeline. And nothing was done by the federal government, as it were, in terms of sending delegation in the real sense of it to that place until May 31, a day after the governor of Oyo State visited. So if anybody is trying to develop a conspiratorial thesis, you take a look at the timeline. How come this occurred 4 days after the Homeland Security Advisor appointment was announced? How come the so-called Homeland Security Advisor, who happens by his name to be Yoruba and obviously from Southwest, did not show up as part of the federal government delegation? The person that showed up included the Chief of Staff to the President Commander-in-Chief and the National Security Advisor. These are the real issues that we should be discussing. How come they showed up and they went to the place and they traveled by helicopter? And if you are familiar with the story, most of the people in those communities have equally talked about other certain helicopter flying in that jurisdiction. So when you want to discuss all these things, you'll discover that the main interest of this administration has been to stifle opposition, shrink the civic space, make sure that they attack as many persons who are speaking, that are having a voice representing the people. And that is why you'll discover that a number of actors are now becoming silent, and then people are being hounded.
Let me do this follow-up quickly because where time is flying. There are specific cases of attempts being made by certain individuals to encumber the PDP. The PDP, more or less now, is total disarray, total complete disarray. You don't even know whether it still exists, or legally speaking. The ADC, from one court case to the other, being bounced from one courthouse to the other. One decision today says, oh, all clear. Another decision tomorrow says, no, you have a case to answer. So, and then the NDC, of course, you remember the case of the Lokoja High Court that says, no, register them December last year. Suddenly wakes up June this year and says, no, deregister them. After they've completed all party conventions, party primaries and all of that. The SDP. Doc, I could go on and on. I want you to speak to these specific instances of shadowy individuals. Some in the office of the Chief of Staff to the President, some known faces of government attempting to, overtly, not even cover, overtly to destabilize these political parties and actors. And as it's been alleged, to ensure 2027, we do not have a real contest. We end up with a coronation. We end up with effectively a one-party state. Address this, maybe 1 or 2 minutes, Doc.
I will address it this way by speaking directly to His Lordship, the Chief Justice of Nigeria, Kudirat Kekereakun. My Lord, congratulations for being in office at a time like this. We are doing this interview about 176 days away from the presidential election. I plead with you to remember the 6-month rule, and I will ask you to use your good offices as the Chief Justice of Nigeria, the Chair of the Judicial Council, to issue the necessary practice direction that will ensure that all litigations, all manner of phony cases that can make Nigeria to go against this 6-month rule as provided for by ECOWAS Supplementary Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance, the African Charter on Democracy and Good Governance, and the International Covenant on Civil, Civic, and Political Rights. I plead with you to understand that the Nigerian judiciary may never recover should all these political litigations that are ongoing eventually contribute significantly to derailing the democratic experiment in the Nigerian state. It will fall under you. You are the incumbent Lordship Chief Justice of Nigeria, Kudirat Kekereekun, Grand Commander Order of Niger. I plead with you to do the needful. And in the same vein, I want to speak to some of the presidential candidates, particularly Peter Obi, his vice presidential candidate, Kwankwaso, who are instigating legal proceedings against individuals during this period. They too must obey the 6-month rule by ensuring that every manner of litigation is terminated or suspended until after the elections. I am saying this because you wanted me to start discussing. No, the real crux of the matter is that when you have the international covenant and all these supplementary protocols that Nigeria is a state party to being breached, as we are breaching it now, we are creating the necessary mix for a political upheaval. Some of us had built scenarios around and saying that we may end up having a major political crisis. You, the political parties, you, the presidential candidates, aspirants, and whatever, you need to go and read the book that was written on Abraham Lincoln's team of rivals. He constituted a presidential team of rivals. The same thing goes to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. In the last 3.5 years, or the 3 years plus now, that you've been in office, you've not successfully harnessed the resources of the political space.
Doc, I know you've spoken passionately and patriotically, I might add, on the appealing to the conscience of the Chief Justice of Nigeria, Justice Kudirat Kekereekun. You even called on now the newly inaugurated or elected NBA president, Mrs. What's her name? Onye Consola, Badejo Kusoya, SAN. Okay, but I won't let you leave. I won't allow us to leave this subject of the judiciary without asking you. We lived through the judicial system as it operated under the dark days of the military in this country, the military dictatorships and all of that, and how the judicial system then, the bar and the bench, acquitted themselves, reasonably holding themselves to very high standards. I want you to do a comparison between the judicial system then and now, the confidence, engendered in the everyday Nigerian people, compared from then to now. 1 or 2 minutes, if you can.
It's unfortunate that the quality and standards and level of compliance with the legal and policy frameworks of the Nigerian state have become suspect with regards to the judicial and legal system of the Nigerian state. I was privileged in the early 2000s to have been a consultant to the World Bank HEMCAP project on the review and reform of the administration of legal justice and justice system with the U.S. Center for Law Studies. We've never had it this bad. And I can only plead with those who are in practice today to kindly understand that if we do not correct this trend, we will have a major crisis, the beginning of which we may all know, but the ending we may never be part of seeing. And as such, the people that are creating most of this crisis are legal practitioners, whether they are in the bar or on the bench, like the certain Daniel Buhala, who is a legal practitioner, who posted that thing on his X. I find it very strange that a legal practitioner in the ilk of the certain Daniel Buhala will post such a thing. It's very sad. It is very sad that counsels will take briefs and will not ensure that the pleadings are such that will attract the best out of the judges and the case law management system and the kind of authorities being cited and the way they are expected to generate the interest of reposing confidence in the judicial system is waning. I pray that all this will change.
You touched on my next question now when you spoke. So, the weaponization of the cybercrimes, law in Nigeria. I don't know what your view is on this, because it is being weaponized against ordinary citizens who are probably doing, what citizens' activism. I mean, you referenced a couple of times now, presidential candidate of the AAC, Mr. Omoyele Sowore, is being put through the court judicial system. In fact, he was remanded in prison custody a couple of weeks ago and then granted bail again and all of that. This is a presidential candidate who ordinarily should enjoy certain immunities and privileges as a candidate against the incumbent president. But what was his offense? That he insulted the president, called the president a derogatory term. Are you worried that the Cybercrimes Act is being weaponized against media practitioners, opposition figures, or everyday Nigerian citizens? Doc.
It is very unfortunate that those who have the privileges of reading and applying the legal and policy frameworks of the Nigerian state have chosen to use it to conscript, to shriek, and to strangulate and suffocate the civic space. But unfortunately, the crimes and criminalities associated with digital age has caught up with that sector, and that is why the incumbent chairman of the EFCC now talks about the fact that a number of things are happening. But these things will happen, and the aspect that he should have helped us to interrogate a little further. It is good for him to say there was a particular young man that had about 5 billion processed through his accounts from politically exposed person. Who is that politically exposed person, my brother Olukayode? Who? You need to mention so that we can do the public shaming and we can know the kind of category that we are dealing with. So that this weaponization of cybercrime laws against people that are involved in activism. And that is why even those of us who are privileged to feature in programs like this, we are very mindful of the fact that even though you know a lot more, you don't want to operate or disclose anything that will make you run foul. For example, it's now about 5 years ago that a certain chief of army staff died in an air crash, May 21 of that year. How many reports have been generated to review the circumstances that led to the decision to put in the same aircraft the chief of army staff, chief of military intelligence, the provost marshal, and his chief of staff, to the extent that they will just die?
Is that abnormal? Is that
you're not supposed such officers, the SOP does not allow such officers to travel in the same equipment. Now, what happened? Does it have anything to do with this war on terror? Have we taken the pains of reflecting on what happened to Flight Lieutenant Tolulope Arotile? We need to reinvestigate this.
Okay, Doc, like you said, there are so many things people like that you cannot. But let's move on because of time. It will be remiss of us if you don't talk about the raging controversy concerning the Chief of Staff, Mr. Femi Gbajabiamila, or Right Honorable Femi Gbajabiamila, the Chief of Staff of the President of the Federal Republic, concerning this now termed phantom organization, the PFIC, Presidential Foreign Intervention Promotion Council. Of course, you know the sordid details, so there's no point rehashing it. The denial, counter denials, the man has been arrested, Prince Adeni Adeyemi has been arrested now. Can you speak to this? What's your own opinion about this? The seeming total failure of state institutions and all of those.
I recall that after one interview that I granted one of the national media outlets, and I used the phrase dysfunctional presidency. Some folks approached me and said I was harsh. I will repeat. The subject matter is a classical manifestation of the level of the dysfunctionality of the presidency of the Nigerian state. And like I said earlier on this same subject matter, I am not interested in the certain Right Honorable Femi Gbajabiamila GCON. I'm not. I am more concerned about the fact that a certain Bayo Ononuga, presidential spokesman, has acknowledged that the presidency of the Nigerian state was infiltrated by an impostor, a con artist. And this impostor and con artist at least attended functions where he was 40 centimeters close to the incumbent vice president of the Nigerian state, Vice President, His Excellency Kashim Shettima. It means that he could equally have had access to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu if an impostor that you have agreed could have access 40 centimeters, the pictures are in public domain, to the vice president.
Before we move away from this subject matter, the president eventually did cave in and expressly mandated the ICPC to carry out an investigation into this matter and submit their reports within 30 days. But you said here yourself, Dr. Fagbemi, that there was a case of the ICPC who were meant to have investigated. Okay, a petition was written by Dangote.
Olawale,
Hold on, Doc. Aliko Dangote wrote a petition concerning a public official, the former executive secretary of the NUPRC, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And then we never had anything. The guy eventually left, but we never had anything. Is it proper for President Tinubu to have mandated the ICPC to ask for an investigation of this matter when Mr. Gbajabiamila is still in office? And this ICPC will report to him, or he would oversee. Just speak to this 1 or 2 minutes, Doc.
The incumbent president is shying away from executing his office. Ideally, like I said on Arise Television, what ought to have taken place is for the president to have activated the Tribunal's Inquiry Act, because the ICPC, like every other entity, you remember that some of the pleadings that is now in public domain as part of the things that have been taken to court says that the matter actually had gotten to the police. And you ask yourself, if it had gotten to the police since last year, how come the sharing of the data as information, as press releases, never came from the force public relations system? That it had to be coming from the certain Bayo Ononuga of infamy with all his funny press releases that are basically strategic distraction, strategic desensitization, and strategic disinformation. How come the police never issued statements before the certain Bayo Ononuga? How come this character was apprehended and he was flown by private jet? Who authorized the use of private jets? Under which vote did the money to hire the private jet get released? That's why I said I'm not interested in the nitty-gritty of that unfortunate matter. I have said ideally what you want me to say is when you have officers that appear complicit, The correct thing, based on public service rules, which are applicable, is for them to proceed on administrative leave pending the investigation. Do we expect any miracle from ICPC? I've said it, and I'll repeat it for the records. I do not expect anything to come out of the ICPC investigation if by now a respected global citizen like Aliko Dangote will raise an alarm. He was compelled to raise an alarm in public domain, and he even followed suit by filing a petition to the same ICPC. And the ICPC said, even though it appears as if Aliko Dangote has been assuaged and he may be wanting to withdraw his petition, that petition is already public record. And ideally, by the statutes that established the ICPC, what should have happened is that the ICPC should have done a thorough investigation. And this brings me to the oversight responsibility of the now infamous rubber-stamped National Assembly under the auspices and leadership of a certain Godswill Akpabio. Now, when you look at what ought to have taken place over that particular matter, you should have expected that an oversight investigation should have been done. Because when you are looking at what we are dealing with, Dangote Refinery is a national asset, is a national security asset. If we did not have a Dangote Refinery when this Iran-US-Israel tango and the Strait of Hormuz crisis started manifesting, we would have been in dire straits. Now, it means that if anything was going to affect that national asset, and then we need to start emphasizing the need for us to be careful. If we don't get these things investigated, I know Voila was with you, and a number of them are trying to politicize it and saying you cannot expect the president to remove Gbajabiamila because it is politics, and that's why I've tried to stay away from all those dynamics. And I'll say to them, in the Bible, Caiaphas, the high priest that year, had to say it is better for one man to be crucified than for the entire nation to perish.
Thank you, Doctor. Do you believe the opposition parties, many have accused them of always crying wolf? Some say they are lazy. Many say they are lazy. Mr. Daniel, you referenced a couple of times, said they are intellectually daft, very strong, pejorative. But are they doing enough, in your opinion, Dr. Fagbemi, to put the ruling party, the ruling government on its toes, to put them under pressure? Like one of my very good friends, Professor Chidi Odikalu, said that if you don't put the ruling, and I agree with Chidi Odikalu, it's everywhere in the world. I mean, we see in the British Parliament, leader of opposition putting incumbent prime minister every Tuesday, PMQs, on their toes. Do you think the opposition political parties, are they doing enough to put under pressure, positively speaking, anyway, the ruling party?
The Nigerian political system, and I'm speaking as a political scientist now, is populated by individuals and characters that are only interested in state capture and see the dynamics of democratic practices, institutions, and succession only from one prism, as an opportunity to capture the state and appropriate and implement and utilize for their selfish ends, and not necessarily for the common good. If their interests were integrated national development and growth, the opposition would have become more vibrant. And mind you, people will always make reference to the fact that when ACN was transmuting 2012 to 2013, eventually to become APC, they were more vibrant as opposition, and that was why it was easy for them to oust the PDP, Jonathan, in 2015. They must never forget the fact that those are elements that were mindful of the fact that if they do not orchestrate this, they will never be able to take advantage of the state capture mentality. And once they have captured it, and a number of the people that are now in opposition, they themselves were political opportunists in the real sense of it, only very few. So they cannot perform, they cannot give what they don't have. When you say they have been classified by some other individuals.
Very important. Dr. Fagbemi, has this government of President Tinubu, have they crossed any red lines that have raised your concern? I've had guests here who told me they're seriously concerned about a number of things, but for you, political red lines, judicial red lines, democratic red lines, even legal red lines, which of these have this government, crossed in your opinion? And also, add to it, some have said the president is not doing whatever he is doing just to win election next year and leave office 2031, that there is a very strong likelihood of him staying in office, life presidency or third term or fourth term. Your views?
The issue at stake when you want to reflect on the subject you have just tried to fly the kite on has more to do with the inability of this incumbent government to receive and process feedback. That's a red flag and red line for me. The inability of this government to receive feedbacks, process it properly.
Constructive criticism, advice.
Feedback. The constructive criticism is part of participatory democracy. Military administration will receive feedback and they will process it and use it to implement. I was privileged to have served under the President Ibrahim Babangida administration, which was military, and then the Abacha administration. And I was privileged to have been in charge of what was called the National Mood Reporting, which was a feedback thing. So you collate the data, you take a look at it, mirror it against your policies, and then you do the needful. Now, a responsive government takes the feedback in. The next red flag for me is their mismanagement of the information system that is very problematic.
Okay. You didn't talk about the rumored or alleged tenure elongation.
It is correct to assume that the way they are going about it, when you have a National Assembly that is hand in glove with the executive, and you've already started hearing a certain Opeyemi Bamidele Senate leader talking about an amendment when they come back. And this is where, to me again, it says, is he thinking the way normal human beings think? Are they all thinking the way normal human beings think? How many of us can determine that tomorrow we will wake up for you to start planning? But if you are to look at all the parameters, it is clear that it is not impossible that a third term, by default with the single term agenda, when they come back to that bill, may be in the workings, and mind you, if they could pass the change of national anthem in one day. And this is where you were asking a question earlier on, the weaponization of the Cybercrimes Act. It is an attempt to make it difficult for citizens to challenge. And you remember they attempted it with the Infectious Diseases Bill in 2019 or thereabout, 2019, 2020. I had to do a piece that challenged the then incumbent speaker, Right Honorable Femi Gbajabiamila. He had done the Infectious Diseases Bill reading, first reading, second reading the same day, and they were to resume the following day to come back and railroad that Infectious Diseases Bill through. But I was able, within the number of hours to develop a 12-page instrument that I used in challenging. And then they started lobbying. Unfortunately enough, and I must thank those of you in the media that are able to allow some of us ventilate the way we do. We were able to do that. Unfortunately, these people have succeeded under this administration to muzzle the media.
Final question, Doc. What possibilities exist for defeating President Tinubu by any or a combination of the political parties angling for that office, democratically speaking, in 2027? What possibilities, logically, reasonably, in your own mind, as enlightened on this matter?
I will say they should recall Abraham Lincoln. How Abraham Lincoln was able to harness, aggregate, and deliver a team of rivals. What will save Nigeria going forward, 2027 beyond, is government of national interest, security, and unity. If they do not understand that, they are not starting. I pray the political actors, the political class, will re-engineer their mindsets to understand that they can constitute a team of rivals. You asked me a private question by chat on one of the presidential candidates, Prince Adebayo, and I said, this is a kind of man that ideally, when we are constituting a government of national interest, security, and unity, will be a better person to serve as the anchor, as it were, of the economy and the issues of development. All these individuals, and I've listened to my good in-law, Osita, who is saying, Osita Okechukwu, who is saying that Atiku should play the role of a statesman. I will play the devil's advocate. Why not ask President Tinubu as well to play the devil's advocate? I'll say, ask him to discontinue his own race and let us have a generational shift. So it's not for national interests, security, unity, integrated national development. We need to have a change of guards. We need to have a situation, because at my own age, I was made to understand that we were the leaders of tomorrow. I am yet to occupy any position of trust in the Nigerian state, and I'm already a grandfather. Now, if we continue with the Emilokon spirit and the sense of entitlement of Messrs. Atiku, of Peter Obi, of the incumbent president, and we do not have this paradigm shift, we are going to have crisis on our hands. And mind you, we had the end SARS, we had the end bad governance, and we are having this constriction and constriction and the strangulation of the middle class and the youth. Mind you, those that are educated are easy to manage, but we are now having the Almajiris and the others that are out of school being denied the opportunity of having the intervention agenda that should have improved their lot. You have a situation where the Almajiri Commission is now being made to do projects that are unrelated to the catching and bringing these out-of-school children to school. If we don't get it right, Chief Obafemi Awolowo told us, he forewarned us, that if we do not take care of these children of nobody that have been relatively deprived, and the system is frustrating, when the uprising comes, the beginning we may know, we are definitely not going to be able to ascertain and know the end.
Nice place to anchor, Dr. Fagbemi. It's been a wonderful 1 hour, 10 minutes session with you. I didn't expect any less. Thank you for coming, Doctor. And I'm sure we'll do this, often as we wind down towards 2027 elections. And even after the elections, we'll still be here to review the outcome one way or the other. Thanks so much.
It's a privilege, and I must commend
SYMFONI
SYMFONI for a job well done that you are always doing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fagbemi. We appreciate it.
Thank you.